Well, it's inexplicable. I don't know how to excuse them, Sandra. We also have not heard from the vice president, I believe, since Friday as well. And so normally whenever you have the loss of life of Americans at the hands of a terrorist attack, at least 9 Americans, God forbid there's more, but often in these situations, the number does go up. I can't think of a situation where this many Americans have been killed or held hostage, and we don't hear from the president or the vice president. Of course, we heard from the president yesterday, but we haven't heard directly from him or the vice president since those 9 Americans were confirmed. I would also remind our audience that this is a rough estimate, but I think we have around 200,000 Americans living in Israel. That also includes people that are visiting. And so these are people that will have an incredibly difficult time getting out, Sandra. So in addition to all the things you just talked about, there are potentially hundreds of thousands of Americans stuck in a war-torn country that are obviously going to want a clear plan for how they get out.
So we mentioned just a moment ago that you flew in from Qatar this morning. You were supposed to be in Israel
today,
right now, but the war broke out. What do you make of this report that apparently nobody in this administration can confirm that Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps helped orchestrate this whole thing and gave it the green light, working together with Hamas and Hezbollah in Beirut? Does it surprise you at all?
No, these are just silly semantics. They're playing games because they don't know how to answer for the fact that their Iran policy has completely failed. It has been certified by multiple Republican and Democratic administrations that Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. We know that the weapons that Hamas has, that the aid and funding comes from Iran. This is not a surprise to anybody. We know this. Now, there may be questions of, who was in the room present for the planning. We know that these terror groups, Hamas and Hezbollah, are already giving Iran credit. Remember, in the Trump administration, under my former boss, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, whenever the Iranians were going after the U.S. embassy in Baghdad through their Shia militias, because remember, Iran funds this terrorism throughout the region, not just in the Palestinian areas. Pompeo said to Iran very clearly and very explicitly that anything that your proxies do to hurt Americans, we will hold you accountable for them. So I see the administration playing a lot of semantics over whether Iran was involved or not. This is a joke. I mean, they have the weapons, they have the funding, they have the capability because of Iran. It is their proxies here in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon. It is because of Iran that these terrorist groups have the ability to operate. I would also remind you that the heads of al-Qaeda sit in Iran. Mike Pompeo took that information, declassified it, and put it out in January of 2020. As far as I know, they're still there. So this is what the administration needs to do, instead of playing semantics about whether the $6 billion they just gave Iran a couple weeks ago has been used yet or not. We all know money is fungible. Instead of playing semantics, instead of arguing trivial points, they need to take a step back and realize that over the past 3 years, their Iran policy, where they have not enforced U.S. sanctions that are on the books, so now Iran is able to sell their oil, they're much richer. They have chased Iran for 3 years, trying to appease them, to beg them, to cajole them, to plead them to get back into a deal that clearly Iran had no interest in getting in. This is the same Iran that is actively trying to kill former U.S. officials, including Mike Pompeo, right now in America. This is the same Iran that chants death to Israel and death to the United States. Why in the world does anyone need confirmation that they were behind what happened in Israel over the weekend? What else do you need? Do you want a picture of Khomeini with his finger on the button? Give me a break.
Morgan, former President Donald Trump spoke earlier today on all of this and said this about the atrocities. Listen.
The atrocities we're witnessing in Israel would never have happened if I was president, would never have ever happened. Joe Biden betrayed Israel. As president, I will once again stand strongly with the state of Israel, and we will cut off the money to the terrorists on day one.
In that speech, Morgan, he said, we reduced the Iranian economy. He said, I withdrew from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal, imposed the toughest ever sanctions on the regime, and imposed a strict travel ban to keep radical Islamic terrorists the hell out of the country. Now they're pouring into the country. Joe Biden, he said, undid it. He went on in that speech to say the problem was caused, in his opinion, by his boss, Barack Obama. As we are noting the White House's silence here, we also have noted the silence on the part of the former President Barack Obama as well.
Yeah,
And Clinton.
again, inexplicable. I could say that former President Trump was right in the policies that he laid out. You know, we saw, what did we see at the end of the Trump administration? The Abraham Accords that I was a part of, Sandra, these were the first peace deals between Israel and Arab states in 26 years. That's what we handed the Biden administration. Within 3 months, remember, Hamas was attacking Israel already. Then we saw the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. Then we saw the Russians invade Ukraine. And now we have seen the most loss of life to the Jewish people since the Holocaust. This is a day when I'm incredibly concerned about who is in charge. This is not just Israel's war anymore. Lives were lost. 9 Americans' lives were lost. So there needs to be a policy change, and there needs to be retribution for the Americans that were killed this weekend by terrorists.
Morgan, it's great to see you.